And now this. They might think you're playing, but I know you're evil. I know it. You're only here to take your education back to Inferno Island and serve your father like the bitch you are. I ignored his struggling at the bottom of the pit and placed my hand on the switch that would free him. With a cold, dead tone, I asked, "Do you even know how long I spent there, Matt?" I didn't wait for him to answer that. 10 very long, very instructive years. You know nothing about what I'm capable of, and even less about what he would do in my place. You fucking impaled me. I'd say that's evidence enough. And yet, you're still talking, I shrugged. Maybe I should have cut your tongue out first. It'd grow back, so I'm sure City Master wouldn't mind. I'm tired of hearing your incessant whining. Fuck you, Nick. If it were my father, he'd have filled that pit with acid and then blocked your exit with a force field. That's probably a weakness for you, if you're wondering. Strong, steady damage to counteract your healing factor. If it's caustic enough, it might even kill you. You'd die slowly, and he'd take notes to the music of your screams. From the pit, I heard, "You're disgusting." And yet I still grant you mercy. Weird how that works. I hit the switch on the wall, and I heard metal slide back as the spikes retracted. Matt groaned in relief. Slowly, the platform rose to free him. Matt didn't wait for it. He used his claws to gouge furrows into the stone walls of the pit, and soon climbed out of it with a vicious snarl. I rolled into the kitchen and snatched a carving knife from the counter. I held it and waited for him to charge at me, as was his pattern. The back door behind me was wide open, revealing a bright, sunny day in stark contrast to the tension inside the house. Matt was still very bloody from the spike, but his shoulder seemed completely healed now. "You're not gonna survive the year's end, Nick." Matt's voice was guttural. He was becoming more and more the beast, and less the man. "I'm gonna find a way to make you disappear." Ah. I clicked my tongue and granted him an amused little grin. It was only half fake because I knew he'd say that. He was getting too predictable. Listen to those shallow little threats, all that posturing. What a brave boy you are. I tapped my chin with my free hand, wide-eyed and mocking. Wait a minute. Is this the part where you charge at me and bumble right into the next trap? Sure enough, he snarled and did exactly that. I rolled toward him, easily avoiding the blow. As Matt missed me, he tumbled through the back door, tripping wires which sent huge volts of electricity into his body. He screamed in pain and writhed in the grass like a wild animal. I let him suffer for a few seconds, but again, I eventually freed him from the wires with another switch, and they retracted back into the house as if they'd never existed. I chuckled at the way he rose from the ground on trembling knees. His glare could melt steel, but I was beyond caring now. I put a hand on my hip and gestured at him with the kitchen knife. See, that time I actually warned you, and yet you still fell right into it. You only have yourself to blame, you know. I shrugged. I hate you. Yes, I got that part. I gestured back towards the door, tisking with a click of my tongue. Listen, sweetie, that's 2 times I let you go. You're gonna have to start putting in some effort, because any more freebies and my grade will suffer. Matt wiped his chin with the back of his wrist and stood a little more steadily on his feet. You're only freeing me from the traps to make yourself look benevolent, he spat. That's what you do. You're a manipulative fuckhead. He'd already completely recovered. If he weren't such a stubborn pain in the ass, I'd be impressed. It was amazing how quickly he could heal from nearly anything. Manipulative, huh? I glanced up at the building where Adelaide had been dangled before. I had moved her into the building itself, where she'd be more comfortable. I knew Matt would waste a lot of time fighting against me. I gestured at the building and lifted a mocking brow at him. "Aren't you gonna go save your damsel? You seem to be a little distracted." Matt swore as he finally remembered his original purpose and turned from me to run across the street. I held back a smile, happy to know that despite the tension between us and the lengths I had to go to play this role, he really was learning. Assuming he could get over himself and see beyond the surface layers, he'd become a fantastic hero. But it was a tall order. I raced in behind him, and despite being unpowered, I was faster than he was. I cut in front of him in the middle of the road, and then shoved him back so he fell on his ass. He snarled at me again, and his eyes were an angry, golden hue. He did that when he turned, embracing more and more of the beast within him. I'd yet to see him go completely werewolf. He always maintained some portion of humanity, even when he was furious, but I suspected that at his full potential, he was an absolute monster. Even now, it seemed to be a struggle for him to keep it under control, and I decided to poke the beast, to test just how strenuous that control really was. If it broke this easily, he was in for a rude awakening when a real villain tested his patience. "If you're so brave and righteous, why do you spend your time with a prick like Brad?" I asked. "The dude can't even understand the concept of saving innocent lives." Sure enough, Matt swung at me with one of his claws, and I easily dodged out of the way. He was a very emotional creature, and in a way much like the wolf that he emulated. Dogs were loyal to their pack, and so was he. Too bad he didn't think about much else. I dodged his next attack easily enough, and then shrugged at him. "I've seen him eyeballing the girls as they leave their dorm," I went on, and Matt tried to hit me again, but I sidestepped out of the way. He was far too easy to avoid. I kept talking like nothing had happened, and this only pissed him off even more. He catcalls them, whistles to them, tries to slap their asses like the alpha male douche that he is. You better keep a watch, or he'll try it on Kristen soon, and she will actually kill him. I know danger when I see it. "You leave my sister out of this," Matt roared. He dove at me, and this time, instead of dodging, I kicked him hard in the gut. As he fell and buckled forward, I stabbed him in the chest with the knife. I missed his heart by an inch, but that was on purpose. I wasn't sure if it would kill him or not. When he struggled, I twisted the knife just to fuck with him. He screamed in response and tried to jostle me off, but I pulled the knife out on my own and rolled away from him. "You don't want to hear this, but I don't actually hate you," I remarked as I examined Matt's blood on the knife. It was a pretty dark crimson and already coagulating. I bet his blood could do a lot of good in the medical field. "You can do better than Brad. Your sister can too." Matt's snarl was guttural again. "I said leave my sister." Yes, I know what you said, Matt. Isn't it pathetic how I can just keep distracting you so easily? You really do need to work on your focus a bit more. It's been, 5 minutes? Your rescue score is going to be abhorrent." I tisked and waggled a disapproving finger at him. "Daddy Judgment will be so disappointed." Paling a bit at that, Matt checked his watch and then cursed. He burst through the large front windows of the building and ended up in an empty lobby. I followed behind. Matt was at least trying to learn, and he ran instead of taking my bait when I wolf whistled at him. This time he ran for the stairs and climbed up them very quickly. He nearly fell for a bear trap, but caught the wire just in time and jumped over it instead. I was never going to tell him, but I was actually very proud of that. Somewhere in that big, dumb head of his was a guy with a big heart and a lot of potential. He found Adelaide's room quickly enough, when Adelaide responded to his shouts with a southern, "Help! Oh, help me, brave hero!" I cracked a smile from behind Matt because she was so ridiculous, and I loved her for it. Matt didn't try the knob, likely suspecting another trap. Instead, he kicked the door open, and it slammed into the wall with a loud bang. Adelaide was placed in a comfortable chair by a window that overlooked the street. Likely she'd witnessed the fight between Matt and me. There was a bomb strapped to her waist, and it beeped slow and steady. A bright red light winked in and out, warning about the impending danger. She didn't seem the slightest bit concerned about it, and instead beamed at Matt with bright, happy eyes. "Oh, my precious hero, you came!" I fished the bomb's trigger from my pocket. Matt looked from me to the bomb, then to the trigger with a noise of disgust. A bomb? You've crossed the line, Nick. This is going too far." "Have I?" He gestured angrily. A bomb!" I shrugged at him and pretended to look bored. "And what are you going to do about it, hero?" For a long moment, Matt did nothing. It was clear he wasn't sure if he should gamble on me pulling the trigger or go for Adelaide and risk blowing her up. I sighed in irritation when I could smell his little brain burning. "Matt, please, just rescue her. It's not that hard." He was a broken record now and shouted again, "It's a bomb!" "Yeah, and?" "A bomb!" I rolled my eyes. "For God's sake." I threw the detonator away, and his eyes grew wide as golf balls. "It's not a real bomb, you dumbass. Go on, save her. Time's ticking." Matt didn't move. "What do you mean, save her? You're supposed to—" "I'm tired of this," I sighed. 10 minutes. You wasted 10 minutes, Matt. Just end it. Tentatively, Matt crossed the room and pulled at the bomb vest like it was a poisonous snake. He looked comical, terrified that he was going to blow up at any second. I sighed and crossed my arms. "I'm not actually evil, you know. That's in your head." He snorted, clearly thinking otherwise. "And if you're wondering, you could have used the door to stun me," I told him. "Or you could have noticed her in the window to start with. The bomb was obvious even down at the street. It's got a big red fucking light on it. And even if you didn't, you could have wrestled me for it. A bomb that big would have taken the whole building, and I'm a lot of things, but suicidal isn't one of them. It was a threat. You get your hands on the trigger, she's safe anyway. The one time you could have fought me, you didn't, and the many times you shouldn't have, you did. You're a mess, Matt. Get your shit together." "Fuck you, Nick." I rolled my eyes. Yes, fuck me," I gestured. "Got a fetish or something?" For once, Matt ignored the bait. He freed Adelaide, and she hugged him tightly. His cheeks burned when she kissed him on the cheek. "My hero," she cheered. When we returned to the gym, City Master cornered us both. He had his arms crossed, a grumpy line etched between his brows. Behind him, Kara and Andy were displayed on a large screen, currently taunting one another in their own match beyond the door. Andy was in the middle of an evil cackle, her laugh wide and obnoxious, like something out of a cartoon. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Horrid display, Barber," City Master tisked disapprovingly. "If you ever want to be named a hero, start acting like one. This isn't about your little vendetta or your familial problems. It's about the innocent up in that tower. You let your emotions control you out in the field like that, and people will die for it. You let yourself be manipulated far too easily, and if it were a real situation, Adelaide would have died up there. Get over yourself and get out of here." Matt roughly shoved me with an arm as he stormed by, and I shoved him back. City Master sighed and rolled his eyes. "Deal with your garbage later," he said. "You're both up again soon. Roll reversal this time." I started to walk away when City Master called me back. "And Nick, good job." Kara won her match against Andy, and Eric won his against Kristen. Jack won against Brad, who couldn't seem to understand that the idea was to rescue Adelaide and not try to brute force his way past a man that was quite literally a walking brick wall. With that, it was time for my second round with Matt. The idea of being the villain made my gut roil for obvious reasons, even though I did an okay job. Now that I was the hero, I was really looking forward to this exercise. After Matt headed in to set the traps, Andy pulled me into a quiet corner away from the others and smiled. Her hand was warm in mine. "I've been meaning to ask, Nick," she said firmly. "You interested in a date?" That was Andy, utterly blunt with no fear and no regrets. I respected the way she went after the things she wanted in life, and I wish I had half as much courage to do the same. I smiled back as my heart fluttered for a moment. I wasn't feeling very confident, but she inspired me to try. "You trying to seduce me, Andrea Baker?" I quipped. She chuckled and closed the distance between us. Her arm settled around my waist, and I laid a hand on the small of her back. Her eyes were heated with a mischievous light. "Is it working?" When she looked up at me with those bottomless brown eyes, I kissed her nose. "No seduction necessary. Get me alone for 2 minutes and you can have your wicked way with me. I promise I won't even call for help." She barked a laugh and then playfully shoved me away again. "Well, that was fast. Maybe you're too easy, Mr. Gaddion. I like a good chase." "Well, I won the last race I competed in," I shrugged nonchalantly. "Why not another?" Andy hummed in approval. "I like a man with confidence. Keep that up, it looks good on you." I smiled at that and scratched the back of my head. "What time am I meeting you then?" "Who said I was still gonna date you, Nick?" She grinned back and gestured at the door to the rescue test. It was open wide and waiting for me to deal with Matt. "Impress me first." With a sharp intake of breath, I felt the power flow through my veins. Limitless, untapped potential, a near godlike state that I sorely wished I could maintain for more than 10 minutes at a time. Andy whistled as a breeze picked up around me before settling back down again. I gestured at her watch. "Time it." She fiddled with the setting on it and then nodded toward the door. "Go." My power swept over me as I burst through the door so quickly that I tore through Matt's waiting net trap. In fact, I barreled straight through every single trap he set, and I didn't even bother to pay attention to the new surroundings of our test. All of them would have been lethal to the average person, but I wasn't average, and they weren't made to slow me down. So instead of dealing with them, I just pushed forward, and a moment later, I found myself on a rooftop. Adelaide was dangling on the other side of the street, with Matt pacing in front of her, claws and teeth bared. "Gaddion, you..." He began to snarl, but I didn't even let him speak. Instead, I flew straight up into the air and then dove toward Adelaide before Matt could catch me. I caught her easily enough, cut the rope with a heated ray from my eyes, and then sat her down safely on the other rooftop in less than 3 seconds. She whistled. "That's the fastest rescue I've ever had, I think. Is there someplace you've got to be, son?" "Yeah." I grinned and then laughed at the way Matt just gawked at me from the other side of the rooftop. His fists were balled at his sides, and I could see all the threats of death he wished my way. "I've got a date to catch." Chapter 8. Matt. Before Volkov, Kristen and I would finish each other's sentences. I spent nearly every waking moment of my life with her, and the two of us could have entire conversations with a glance. Time alone with my sister was time alone with myself. I'd do anything to get that back. These days, I felt like we spoke two different languages, and I think she agreed because she couldn't seem to stand my presence for more than a few hours at a time. She always found an excuse to hide in her notebook or wander off back to the girls' dorm where it was safe. She was uncomfortable around me. I hated that. I'd never wanted anything other than to keep her safe, and this ongoing feud with Nick was part of that. The fact that she couldn't see this, it drove me nuts.
Forget her,
Brad grumbled. He glared upward like the heavens had dealt him a personal insult. Maybe they had once.
She's a girl. Girls are stupid by default.
We were on the roof nursing root beers and looking up at the night sky. Jack and Kristen had retired to bed, and it was just him and me for the last few hours. We'd been playing chess, and Brad was currently winning. Apparently, he was really good at it. He was different. Not my usual company by any stretch, but I'd grown to like his presence. Relatively useless on the power front, but smart. Smarter than Jack, anyway. Plus, he agreed with me about Nick, and I needed more allies in my life. I liked it when people agreed with me. The only real downside was that Brad was a douchebag who hated women. We all had our faults, though. I did my best to ignore it for the most part, assuming, of course, that he didn't extend it to Kristen. That's my sister you're talking about, I reminded him with a glare. She's off limits, remember?
Right.
Brad shrugged. He sipped his root beer and decided not to look at me for a few moments. I could feel the passive-aggressive buzz around him and grimaced. Instead of making a move on the chessboard, I glanced up at the sky and tried to trace the constellations in my mind. After Dad left, Kristen and I would find a lot of comfort in stargazing. I got her a telescope for her birthday once. It was the happiest I'd seen her in a long time. She didn't smile much anymore. It's not her fault. I tried, even though I knew Brad would disagree with me. She's just a lot more forgiving than I am. I think she's tired, you know? We've been fighting this war a lot longer than just here at Volkov.
Sure,
Brad said. It was clear he wasn't even remotely interested. He gestured down to the chessboard between us.
You going to play at some point, or what?
I guess. Brad loved chess from what I could tell because he was really freaking good at it. I liked it too, but it also reminded me of my father. He was the one to train me, and to be honest, the fewer reminders of him, the better. It was bad enough that I thought about him every time Nick and I crossed paths. I doubted my father would be happy about that, or really anything to do with me lately. Maybe Kristen was right. Or maybe they were both unprepared to do what had to be done. I glanced down at the board, only long enough to make a rash decision and move my pawn right into the path of his knight. Brad tisked as he took it away.
It's like you're not even trying,
he muttered. I wasn't. Maybe I should have gone after her.
Christ, Matt. You gotta sew your dick back on. This is ridiculous.
Was it? I'd never had these problems with Kristen before, and it didn't seem right to have them now. Not when a Gatteon was within our grasp and we'd finally managed to get some revenge on behalf of our family. This was too important. Couldn't she see that? God, it's so fucking frustrating. I sighed. I just want to make things right. Brad hummed non-committally. For Kristen, I was almost ready to let it go at that moment, but then I got angry again. It's not fair, I hissed. I've been doing everything I possibly can. Nick's just... He's won the fucking lottery for powers. How am I supposed to compete with that? It's not my fault. He can freaking fly. I want to fly. I tossed my hands angrily. How come I can't fly? Uh-huh, Brad said, sounding distracted. He's got that and the fucking energy beams and those stupid laser eyes, and he's super strong, and... With an angry huff, I settled back on my palms and glanced up at the stars again. Whatever. But then, Brad's queen was suddenly open, and he crossed the board in a bold swoop, calling for check. No, not check. Mate. I blinked down at my hands after he did so, because I couldn't actually remember making a move to free his queen. I must have, though. I think I'm tired, I muttered as I opened and closed my fist in my lap. It felt dissonant, like it wasn't even a part of me anymore. I should head to bed.
Yeah, get the fuck out of here,
Brad said with a chuckle. The wind had made him chipper, and he whistled as he tossed the pieces back into the box.
Thanks for the win, loser. You're too easy.
No problem, asshole. A few minutes later, I was down in the girls' dorm. I peeked my head into Kristen's room and found her scribbling in her notebook. She didn't even look up. She knew I was there. We always knew. Instead of acknowledging me, she kept right on writing. I'm sorry.
Whatever.
Kristen cut me off.
I don't care anymore.
Except that she did. I grimaced and twisted my hands in front of me like a nervous child. She did that to me sometimes. She always knew exactly where to stick the knife. I just want to keep you safe, I argued. She didn't justify that with a response. The cold shoulder hurt more than anything. She was fond of doing that to other people, but never to me. Until now. Kristen, please, go to bed. But go. Frustrated again, I nearly burst into the room to give her a what for. Then I realized I'd never actually yelled at my sister before, and I had no intention of starting the trend. With a frown, I confessed. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm sorry. That made her finally look up at me, and there was a small note of pity between her brows, but then her eyes narrowed to slits a moment later.
Whatever,
she dismissed again.
Don't care. It's over. Go to bed.
That really, really stung. I cleared my throat to resist the emotions that bubbled over inside of me. Instead of barging into her room, I quietly closed the door and walked away. Chapter 9. As evening settled over Volcav, Andy dragged me out of the dinner line with an aggressive tug on my hand.
Forget about that. It's ice cream time.
Still holding my hand tightly, she marched into the kitchen's swinging doors without so much as a knock.
Maria! Maria, are you here?
She shouted. Andy, what's going on? I asked as a short, portly chef approached us.
In a hurry?
The chef asked, with a chuckle as she passed us both chocolate ice cream cones. They had been dipped in syrup and covered in rainbow sprinkles.
Awesome! You're the best!
Andy squealed with joy as she took hers with an excited bounce. I just barely managed a thanks before being dragged off toward the entrance of Volcav. I thought she was in a hurry, but the second we were alone in the hall, her shoulders sank, and she sighed with relief.
Finally,
she huffed. She looked me up and down, and then her smile turned sweet.
I've been thinking about this date for hours. It's been hell getting you alone for 2 minutes.
I chuckled as the two of us walked out the doors of the academy to greet the evening sunset. Andy's sigh at the sight was quiet, and she licked the chocolate off her cone for a moment as she took in the scenery. All the energy that she'd displayed getting out here had faded, and now she seemed somewhat serene. Been thinking about it all day, too. I took a lick of my own cone and then bit the shell with a thoughtful crunch. Where do you want to go?
Don't know.
Andy's smile was content. She pointed toward the endless cedar wood that hugged the perimeter of Volcav.
You know, we never made it this far out when I was little. I had a good view from the apartment, and I used to sit for hours and imagine all sorts of creatures in the forest.
You grew up here? I asked, with a quirked eyebrow, and looked around. The city of Alexandria was one of the final bastions in the decades-long war against my father and his massive army. Refugees from all over the world took harbor in her care, and it was through them that the city thrived in recent decades, nearly tripling in size. She was a beautiful, high-tech metropolis, and home to the world's greatest heroes for as long as anyone could remember. Other cities and nations in other parts of the world still managed to fight Lord Inferno's advances, but Alexandria had been a prime target for years, and had managed to repel him the most. His notorious island headquarters rested in Alexandria's Lucent Bay, and it was her beach that saw the most action in the years since. It was where Amazon S and Triton had first touched ground, after rescuing me all those years ago. It had been a cold, quiet night, with the city sparkling like a diamond on the horizon. I'll never forget the lapping of the waves and the warm feeling of Gemma's hand on my shoulder as she guided me towards a new home. Volcav Academy rested at the very edge of her borders, opposite the bay. It skirted a massive forest that stretched out over rolling mountains into a wilderness oddly unmarked by the bustling metropolis that clung to it.
Yeah, I lived here.
Andy tugged on my hand again and led me down the road deeper into town. On the way, we ate more of our cones, quietly taking in the sights. This side of the city was much quieter than most, but there were plenty of businesses that took advantage of the local college crowd. It was nighttime now, after a long day of classes, and most of the businesses were firmly shut. We passed through the absent streets until the brighter lights of Main Street became more apparent. Whereabouts? I asked as I looked at her, and couldn't help but notice how pretty she really was. She had a perfect body that was curvy and limber, with long blonde hair that I itched to run my fingers through. It was clear she took good care of her appearance, and I wondered, not for the first time, how she'd come to notice me above any other. To say that I was lucky would be an understatement. She was the perfect woman with a smile that could warm the Arctic. She did so then, her cheeks rosy from the nightly chill. The sun had set, and now the moon was creeping up over the buildings.
In the stacks,
she said, missing the hungry look I'd given her in favor of her ice cream cone. I winced because it was a district known for being a notorious breeding ground for the worst crime in the entire city. Originally meant as cheap housing for refugees, cheap labor and cheaper quality apartments quickly degraded their living situation, and years of neglect had taken its toll there. "Oh, sorry," I said when she caught my wincing.
It's fine,"
she shrugged and gestured with her cone.
"Originally we came from Aisha. You know, the home of the Crystal Mountains? Anyway, our family was loaded there. Apparently, we were some sort of ancient royalty."
It was on the tip of my tongue to apologize again, but Andy shook her head.
No, this isn't a pity party,"
she laughed.
"I don't remember that life, Nick. My parents did, and it drove them insane, but I actually kind of liked the stacks. I had some good friends there. Learned to fight there, too.
I looked her up and down with a new eye. A perfect jaw, beautiful plump lips, and creamy pale skin. I could see the royalty now that she'd mentioned it. If you don't mind me asking, how did... I hesitated, unsure if I actually wanted to know.
How did my family lose its fortune?
She laughed at my expression. It was probably obvious that I was worried my father had something to do with it, like he seemed to involve himself in everything else these days. Andy tossed a carefree hand and shook her head again.
Much as I adore you, Nick, not everything is about your daddy issues. Point of fact, it's my own this time.
I lifted a brow in curiosity, and she went on.
So, my mom, she was a member of Congress back in Aisha. She laundered millions in taxpayer money.
I thought your family was royalty, I asked curiously.
Ancient royalty, I said,
Andy corrected.
Thrones are empty these days, Nick.
So she was a crime lord then? Like, what, the mafia? Andy gestured vaguely with a rock of her hand and nodded a little.
Of a sort, I guess. She was a powered, sort of a super genius and scary good at finances. The reason she got caught was another villain. There was some infighting over the money, I think.
Known to happen sometimes. There was no honor among thieves, after all.
Mom was found guilty when I was really little and sent to prison,
she explained as we strolled down the street.
Our family fortune was used to pay off all the debt she owed. Well, most of the debt. Anyway, things got really dangerous after that, and Dad changed our names to protect us. We went to Alexandria to hide among the refugees. Mom joined us later on, after serving her sentence, of course.
So Baker isn't even your real last name? I blinked at her. Andy shrugged and glanced up at the moonlit sky. Stars had spilled themselves across the heavens, and she focused on the various constellations as she thought about how to answer my question.
I'm a Baker in every way that matters,
she said after a moment. Then she smiled at me again.
That other name doesn't matter to me anymore. My mom can keep it. My dad, too, for that matter.
I thought about my own father. He was likely plotting some sort of madness in his evil tower that very moment. It was hard to be proud of the Gatillon name these days, but Eric's insistence that it was a legacy worth keeping still pulsed deep within me. I think I understand, I said quietly as I glanced down at the sidewalk.
Of course you would.
Andy bumped shoulders with me.
You're Nick Gatillon.
Lord Inferno's son, I finished the thought. It was an automated response, a way of punishing myself for years of mistakes that weren't even my own. Andy tisked and stopped dead in her tracks. She spun on her heel, looked me dead on, and jabbed a finger into my chest.
I know it's a habit for you at this point, but you've got to stop doing that, Nick.
I stepped backward, suddenly insecure. Doing what?
Listening to Matt, for one thing,
she sighed and gestured in the vague direction of Volcav.
I didn't ask Lord Inferno's son out on a date tonight. I asked Nick Gatillon. Why? Because I think Nick Gatillon is a sexy guy with a hell of a lot of heart.
Wait, you think I'm sexy? She playfully punched me in the shoulder and grinned.
I've been saying it the whole time, you dork, but don't change the subject. You're a Gatillon because you choose to be. Just like I'm a Baker. You've got to learn to accept that.
I blinked at her, and she must have taken that for confusion, because she sighed and put a hand on her hip.
A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, she quoted. It's not the name that defines who you are. It's what you do with it.
I knew she was right when she said it, but I couldn't help an instinctive urge to deny the whole thing entirely, Everyone hears Gaddion and thinks,
To hell what they think,
she interrupted as she rolled her eyes. She gestured with the hand that still held her, now melting, ice cream cone, then took mine in her empty one a second later. That deep brown gaze was bottomless and infinite. An ocean of amber ink that I could drown in forever.
You let them put too much pressure on you, Nick. It worries the hell out of me.
I blinked again and forced myself to look away from her intense gaze. I stared up at the starlit sky instead and cleared my throat. I don't mean to worry you, I stammered, blushing a little. I'll try harder. Andy gently snatched my chin, and we locked eyes again.
No, silly. You'll think about yourself once in a while. This is what I'm talking about. You keep this up, you're gonna try to carry the whole world on your back. It might work for 10 minutes, but after that, you'll just crush yourself. I don't want to see you fall.
She softened the words with a quick peck to my cheek, then released my chin to hug me with great big warm arms. She was careful not to smash the cone into me, and I did the same in kind. It was all I could do to hug her back and process the emotions swirling around in my head. I wasn't sure of anything at that moment. I was in love. I was overwhelmed, and I had a beautiful woman who believed in me so much that she was willing to argue the point every time I struggled to agree with her. It wasn't that I lacked self-worth, it's just that I'd spent so long living underneath a shadow shaped like the world's most terrifying man. It was odd to have it removed so easily by Andy's bright, burning light. I'm sorry, I whispered. I rested my head on her shoulder for a moment. I'm just not used to someone being so blunt about these things. I've had people believe in me before, but they generally do it very quietly. You, Eric, and Kara are, well, loud about it. I'm not used to it yet. She kept right on holding me until I was ready to let go again. When I did, she took my hand in hers, and we continued our quiet, aimless walk in the night. On the way, I finally finished the cone and ate the rest of it with a quiet sigh. I wasn't used to being vulnerable around anyone, and it was odd that Andy kept managing to pull it out of me.
My parents kept our struggles quiet for years,
she explained, as she glanced sidelong at me. Her own cone was nearly gone now.
Never talked about anything until it bubbled over into fights that nearly killed both of them. They loved each other enough to stay together after Aisha, but they never said it even once. Not where I could hear. Me? I don't want to live like that. I like someone, I tell them. It's important. Something that small can save a life, you know.
I snorted to cover the butterflies beating against my rib cage. Andy's grip was firm around my own hand, a strong measure of support, unwavering, ever determined to be there as long as I needed it. Where the hell had Andy come from? Heaven sent like an angel straight into my lap. A beautiful, stretchy angel who spoke like a motivational speaker and loved brighter and hotter than anyone I'd ever met before. No one talks like that, I told her. Only you. She smiled back at me, and the world was suddenly a bit brighter.
Yeah, well, maybe they should. I meant what I said, Nick. I really like you.
I like you too, I told her, easily. This time, I held her gaze with confidence. I like you a lot. We passed by a media store. A set of monitors were playing news footage, and I caught sight of my dad wearing a suit and tie as he stood behind a podium. He normally wore a ridiculous black and red number full of spikes and flame motifs. To address the public in a suit and tie probably meant that he was trying to tame down the monster image. Since when did he care about PR? The scrolling headline on the newsreel read, Lord Inferno to release speech and address the Empire's concerns. I grimaced and looked away. Andy caught my expression and then yanked me from the monitors a little quicker once she noticed the source of my concern. Unfortunately, a small girl of about 10 recognized my face. I had made the news after being accepted to Volcav, because of whose record it was that I broke upon entry.
"Mommy, look,"
she pointed at me.
"It's the bad man."
"That's not the bad man, sweetie, that's his son." The little girl's mother looked right at me and gave me a soft smile. "He's trying to be a hero, and we should give him the benefit of the doubt." Then she marched her daughter over to me. "Say hi, Katie."
"Hi,"
the little girl squeaked and then held out her hand.
"Pleased to meet you."
"Nice to meet you too," I said as I shook her hand and smiled at her before I shot her mother a questioning look. "Inferno saved my mom before, well," the girl's mother shrugged. "I'd always hoped he'd turn back to being good." She met my eyes then. "I'm hoping you will be the next best thing, or better still, bring your father back to the good side." "I'll do my best," I said with a nod. "That you can count on." "Oh, I believe you," she smiled at me. "Something about you." She glanced at her daughter then. "Well, we better get going. I promised her some ice cream."
"Yippee!"
the girl cried, and as she began to tug her mother away, I couldn't help but smile.
"Ice cream!"
"You know," I said as they turned to go, "I really appreciate it." "The pleasure is all mine," the mother said as she ushered her daughter into a doorway a few meters away. "That was awesome," I said as I turned to Andy. Before I could finish my sentence, Andy dove in for a brutal kiss that quite literally sucked the wind right out of me. I made a noise of confusion, then growled as I pulled the wind back into my own lungs. My fingers ran through her hair as she continued to kiss me without any sign of breaking. Our tongues danced, and I felt the surge of endorphins race through me so clearly that I half wondered if I'd managed to power up twice in one day. When Andy finally pulled back, we were both panting, and I wanted to tear her clothes off right then and there. Her eyes were dark, glistening pools, hungry, desperate. She wanted me bad, but she wanted to take her time, too. She wanted this to be different. As much as I hated to admit it, I wanted this to be different, too.
"See? You just need to believe in yourself, and people will come around,"
Andy whispered, her voice thick with both lust and emotion. Her big brown eyes glistened under the light of the moon, and I was compelled towards it. She jabbed a finger at me, demanding my focus.
"You understand?"
"Andy." She gestured back out the alley, towards where the monitors had been, where that little girl had been.
"Don't let the haters hurt you, Nick. It's bullshit, and you know that."
I wanted to reassure her that I did. I wanted to tell her that the words from that little girl hadn't affected me. I wanted to say that I was fine. I wanted to be confident and brave and strong and all the many, many other things I told myself that I was when I woke up each morning and got ready for class. I knew going into Volcav that I'd win the trials, and I'd learned from fighting Matt what anger could do to a person. I told him I knew exactly where I stood with my father and had believed that at the time. With a thick swallow, I confessed. "I love him, you know." It hurt to admit it. He might be Inferno to everyone else, but he's still my dad. I felt my eyes sting at the truth of it, and glared at the sky while I tried to bury it all back down again. Andy closed the distance between us and took my hand in hers. She led me further down the alley, and after my head cleared a little bit, I realized we were headed towards the stacks. The neighborhoods lost their luster the further we went, and I could feel the eyes of the poor studying the two of us from darkened, shuttered windows.
You don't have to apologize.
But I felt like I did. The world doesn't know him like I do, I said insistently. He tries, Andy. He tries so hard, but he'll never get it. He sends me letters all the time, packages too. Gemma doesn't know. I don't think Triton does either. They'd freak if they did, probably. Andy frowned at that.
They watch you that closely?
I shrugged. I can't say for certain, but it seems obvious that they wouldn't be happy about it, right? They pulled me from that island for a reason, but contrary to popular belief, I don't actually talk to Gemma very often at all, and Triton even less. Until I met you, I didn't really have friends, Andy. Only mentors and senseis and people I'd report to for status updates. Gemma and I, we don't discuss a lot of things. You see, I think she assumes that I resent him, but I don't know. I should. I really should.
You don't have to do anything, Nick,
Andy said as she squeezed my hand in reassurance.
It's all right to love your dad. He's all the family you have left, isn't he?
Yeah, but it's not that.
Tell me about the packages, Nick.
She smiled and led us into an apartment complex. It was an old cement building laden with carefully organized piles of chaos. Newspapers here, food bins there, and a whole row of recycling bins. Well, I rubbed at the back of my neck with my free hand and thought about how to explain it. My eyes scrolled over the peeling paint and faded wallpaper of the surrounding building. Sometimes it's just food or some toy or a book or something. But if he gets word that I'm struggling, even in just classes, he'll get creative.
Creative?
Yeah, well, okay, so when I was in my sophomore year of high school, he kidnapped my math teacher and threatened to hurt her unless she gave me a perfect A. Andy snorted at that. It was so cartoonishly evil, it was probably hard to believe. Once he found out about this bully I had, and you know what he did? Andy shook her head, so I went on. He sent me a bottle of extremely deadly poison. Told me to put a few drops in the kid's meal. I didn't, of course, but that didn't stop him from sending other things. Like a freaking ray gun, Andy. Andy actually giggled at that, which was not the response I was expecting. Most people would be revolted to learn the truth of things, but she was different. She was so different, and I loved that about her. For the first time in a very long time, I smiled as I spoke of him because I was looking at her. She made it better somehow. I'd send him letters explaining that I had no interest in killing my bullies, and he'd send letters back apparently impressed by my choice of pacifism. The exasperation hit me. I wasn't able to talk about this with anyone for such a long time, and now it felt freeing to let it out into the air finally. It's hard to displease him, you see. My dad thinks I walk on water. He's convinced I'm just playing nice to deceive you all, and that someday I'm gonna join his army once I'm properly trained and ready for it.
Sounds like he's proud of you.
Andy grinned as she clapped me on the back.
I'd be proud too.
He's got a funny way of showing it, I grumbled, but this time it was all in good fun. I'm sure there's a whole 6-page letter in the mail waiting for me about his glory days at Volcav, and all the trouble he and Uncle Barber... Say, where are we going? We'd stopped in front of an apartment building, and as I stared at it in confusion, Andy fished for a key.
Oh, I wanted to bring you home. She winked at me. This was my apartment before joining Volcav, and I have a special surprise inside.
A special surprise? I asked as she opened the door, and my mouth fell open in shock. Andy's apartment was beautiful. Not at all luxurious, decorated with hand-me-down furniture she'd no doubt inherited from her parents and their collective efforts at a nice home, but it was comfortable. A place of solace. There were rainbow Christmas lights strung up on the walls, which she flicked on with a switch. They revealed paintings covering nearly every flat surface. Each burst with color, some a vivid splash of rainbow colors, others a sharp contrasting twist of shadows. Stunned, it took me a moment to collect all the works surrounding us. You paint? Andy flushed at the tone of utter reverence in my voice, and she bobbed her head.
I dabble, she said modestly.
You're so... Andy, every time I think I know you, you surprise me all over again. Wow. She cleared her throat and dragged me away from all the beautiful paintings into a side room. It contained only an old sofa and a canvas stand.
Sit there. I want to paint you.
Paint me?
Yes, you.
She rolled her eyes, impatient now.
I told you, Nick, you're sexy. I need to commit to memory. Now, sit.
She shoved me onto the sofa, and I sat down with a huff. Like the kiss earlier, the wind had been knocked out of me.
It's time to enjoy your surprise.
She vanished from the room, only to reappear seconds later with a bag full of paints and a large canvas she'd apparently prepared some time ago. She whistled as she set the canvas on the rack, and then arranged her paints and thinner in a neat little bundle beside her.
Okay, get comfortable. This is going to take a while.
I leaned back against the pillows on the sofa and heaved a heavy sigh of contentment. I'd never been painted before. I didn't even know how to pose or where, but Andy seemed content with where I'd fallen naturally.
You can sleep if you like, she said soothingly. I bet you're an angel when you're sleeping.
You're the angel, I told her. I yawned wide and stretched my arms out enough that I felt my joints pop. All the energy of the day drained right out of me. I hadn't rested after my power use back in rescue class, and all the emotions leading up to this had me utterly exhausted.
Seriously, Nick, take a nap.
Don't even think about giving me wings. I'm no angel.
I'm the artist here.
She grinned and waggled a brush at me.
You just lay down and look pretty.
I hadn't meant to give in so quickly, but I felt safe in her company, free of responsibility and all the demons I'd carried with me for years. I think I'm falling in love with you, I mumbled into the pillow, caught between the dangerous lands of sleep and awake. A giggle answered me.
I think I'm falling in love with you too, Nick.
Chapter 10.
Nick! Nick! Nick!
I woke to the sound of Eric's pounding feet running down the hall of the male dorm. He banged on the door with his fist and shouted,
Nick! Wake the hell up! You've got to see this!
It had been about a week since the date with Andy. She still hadn't revealed the painting to me. She claimed that she needed to take her time with it, and that she had special plans for the reveal. Given how things had gone in that alley, I suspected I knew what at least some of those plans were. I caught her hungry gaze more than once the last few days, and to be fair, she'd caught mine as well. If anyone else had noticed the increase in tension, there wasn't much said on the matter. Matt tried his usual tactics to get under my skin, of course, but with Andy as a solid focus in my life, I hardly even noticed him. That probably annoyed him even more, to be honest. Eric pounced on the door again and begged, "Nick, please!" I glanced at the time and groaned. 6 in the morning, and classes didn't start until 9:30. Generally, I was the one waking him up for those, and it usually took me about a half hour's worth of insistence before he'd even start moving. To be up at 6 either meant he hadn't slept a wink the entire night, or there was something so big going on that he couldn't contain the madness. With a grumpy sigh, I got out of bed. I ran a quick hand through my hair and opened the door with a sour look. Eric, what the hell? He was sparkling again from head to toe and bouncing on the balls of his feet. "There's gonna be a spaceship." He snatched my hand and shook it, which zapped me a little. I hissed and yanked my arm back, giving him a dirty look. "Sorry." He winced and pointed behind him towards the north. I glanced over with a blank look, and blinked again. There was nothing there. It was just an empty hallway. I don't get it," I said, and yawned wide. My brain was still trying to process the fact that we were awake now and not at all sleeping like we wanted to be. Eric laid both hands before him and looked me dead in the eye. "Spaceship. Like, from space. With aliens in it." "Aliens? Space? What?" So, it wasn't a complete unknown. Alexandria, in particular, had been in communication with nations off-planet for over a century at this point, and the revelation that alien life existed wasn't exactly a new one. Back in my granddad's day, there was a hero super genius named Dr. Delacruz, who was obsessed with the idea of space travel. She eventually developed successful ship designs and, with a team of rather brave heroes, made contact with other worlds. She also brought back technology from those worlds and solved many of humanity's biggest problems at the time: hunger, cancer, and even language barriers. There was a statue of her right in front of City Hall. "Yeah, Nick, wake up," Eric enthused. "A spaceship is landing at the school today. We've got an exchange student coming." I blinked again as his words finally sank in fully, and then dashed back into my dorm room. The revelation of alien life might not be a new one, but it was a rare sight all the same. I didn't even know what most of them looked like. I'd seen images of tiny blue people as well as very tall gray ones, but they weren't common by any stretch. Given how expensive it was to travel across the galaxy and how unsafe the planet was in the wake of dominating villains like my father, it was fair to say that these sorts of exchanges didn't occur very often. In fact, the last visit I'd heard of had been when my father was still attending Volcav, and he still turned into a starstruck 18-year-old doofus every time he mentioned it. I scrambled for a set of clothes and was fully dressed in less than a minute. I ran out again in my socks, and Eric snickered and gestured toward them. "You're gonna need shoes," he said with a laugh. Between fumbling with my shoes and getting there, it was about 5 minutes before we had roused the girls. 10 minutes after that, all of us were waiting on a bench by the entrance to Volcav's massive helipad on the gym roof. Kara was still exhausted, and she leaned her head on my shoulder for a light nap. Andy was doing the same on my left, but she was watching the sunrise instead of falling back into dreams. Both my hands were holding either girl's, and I glanced down at both to kiss the tops of their heads. Kara didn't notice, but Andy did. She glanced up at me and smiled. "Few more days," she whispered, trying not to wake Kara. "I'm making good progress. I think this might be the first piece in a while that I'm actually happy with." The last week had consumed me with boyish eagerness that rivaled Eric's. I sorely wanted to know how the painting was going, when I was going to see it, and if she'd settled for something a bit more masculine than an angel. "Did you go with the wings?" "I might have," she shrugged, her smile turning a bit secretive. I couldn't tell if she was serious or not. It was going to drive me insane soon, I was certain.
Kara's seen it, by the way. I needed a second opinion. She said you look cute when you're sleeping.
That made me roll my eyes. Kara roused just a little to slur, "It's pretty." Andy snickered and reached over to pat Kara's lap.
Thank you, Strawberry.
I sighed and tried not to look too defeated. I knew she had to take her time, but I wouldn't put it past Andy to extend the process just a little to drive me up the wall. And she did love a good chase. "So, Kara's seen it," I grumbled, "but I haven't?" Andy jutted her chin at Eric.
To be fair, Sparkles asked me, but I said no.
I snorted at the nickname she'd given Eric. It suited him, really.
He can't keep a secret to save his life.
Eric, who was busy watching the sunrise with all the attention of someone who knew for a fact that there was going to be a spaceship landing on it, bounced on his feet and then shrugged helplessly. He glanced back only a moment, too focused on the horizon. He didn't want to miss even a second of the action.
It just sort of came out, Andy. Jack's not a bad guy, and we were trading stories.
Andy elbowed me softly and pointed at Eric with an accusing finger.
Eric told Jack that you and I are dating.
There was no real heat in her tone. In fact, it was playful. We hadn't established we wanted it kept secret, and if it wasn't apparent, then people really weren't paying attention. Still, this was news to me. I lifted a brow at Eric's back, who missed it in favor of the sunrise. How'd he react? It was Andy who answered, rolling her eyes.
You know how Jack is. His brain is probably bricked too. He said you both deserve each other.
Eric shrugged from the window.
Not in a good way, but that's Jack for you. I guess he's lumped Andy into the same category, because he didn't seem overly stressed that you're dating Matt's rival.
Still, I argued, it wasn't a secret we were dating, so Eric's still in the good books. Andy shook her head and jabbed a thumb at Eric again.
Nuh-uh. He also told Jack about the painting. I know, because Jack later ribbed me about it. Guy's convinced I'm painting a nudie.
I smirked at that, and Andy elbowed me with a little more force. This jostled Kara, who grumbled sleepily. I wrapped a protective arm around her and laughed at Andy's indignant expression. "Oh, come on," I said as I stifled another chuckle. "There's no way you haven't considered it yet."
Well, yeah, but that was for later,
Andy hissed out.
And I didn't want Jack of all freaking people thinking about it. You know he's going to tell Brad, who's going to tell Matt, who's going to tell his sister, and then the entire girls' dorm is going to know, and they'll demand to see it.
The idea of an entire girls' dorm lining up to get a peek at my naked body made me chuckle again. It was ridiculous. No way that'd happen. "Well, charge them a pretty penny for it," I told her as I wrapped an arm around Andy as well. She pretended to grumble at the attention, but I caught a tiny little smile at the corner of her lips. "I don't whore myself out for anything less than 200, Andy. I've got standards." She laughed, loud and boisterous.
That little, eh?
Kara's soft whine at all the noise drew my attention. I rubbed her shoulder gently and smiled as she snuggled her face into my shoulder with a bit more enthusiasm. The redhead was a slow riser, apparently. She seemed determined to sleep until the very last minute. Unfortunately, Gemma, Triton, Adelaide, Ephraim, City Master, and Hero all walked down the hall a moment later and stopped abruptly when they noticed us on the bench. I smiled at Gemma and made a note of Ephraim's scowl at the back of my mind. It was City Master who gestured to the helipad and addressed us.
"Eager to see the ship, are we?"
"Are we ever?" Eric bounced again and pointed at the helipad. He was such a dork sometimes.
"I can't wait."
Triton smiled and asked, How did you learn about the exchange, perchance? Ephraim was still scowling at me, apparently determined to lay blame, but I nodded my head at Eric by way of explanation. The staff glanced at him instead, and Eric shrank at all the attention. I've got my ways? Each of the instructors sighed. That seemed to be a good enough explanation as any, because City Master said, "Very well, come. It has been a long journey for her, and she will need friendly faces. Be on your best behavior." Eric nearly cheered before remembering where he was. He grinned from ear to ear, and his whole body sparkled with little zaps of electric energy in his excitement. "Yes, of course, will do." After rousing Kara awake again, the four of us followed the instructors onto the helipad, a safe distance away from the landing zone. Kara's hand was warm in mine, and Andy had her arms stretched around both of us. Eric was pacing now. The sunrise had exploded into a brilliant golden hue, and as it stretched back along the sky overhead, it turned to a deeper shade of violet. I noticed Andy looking up, drinking all the colors. Had some of them made their way onto her canvas? "Her name is Eileen Ajlal," City Master went on. "She is royalty, and hails from New Sahana." Eric's eyes grew wide as golf balls. "She's a princess?" "Indeed," City Master nodded. "I must warn you, use tact when you ask about her home. Her exchange was funded by the Safe Harbor Project." That caught my attention. Safe Harbor was an Alexandria program designed to take in troubled refugees from war-torn areas of the world. Its first incarnation had failed, hence the stacks where Andy grew up. Later incarnations proved more successful, granting refugees education and career paths to help the city grow more beneficially. Taking on an alien seemed ambitious, which meant that it was likely the situation where she'd come from had been somewhat dire. Eric nodded to City Master's warning, but I could tell that the words flew right in one ear and right back out the other. The second he had Eileen alone, he was going to start drilling her about absolutely everything her culture had to offer. He'd probably even take notes. Unfortunately, the sounds of engines roared from above, and City Master's second warning fell on deaf ears. The alien ship was surprisingly small, about the size of a standard house and shaped like a flat disc. It navigated the atmosphere smoothly, then hovered easily on the helipad without using any landing gear. Lights twinkled on the craft for a moment, and I caught every single staff member adjusting ties and strands of stray hair, apparently nervous about the visit as well. A long set of steps came out of a small hatch, and a beautiful woman flanked by 2 armored guards walked down them. She had pretty purple skin, darker lips, and long flowing black hair that tossed and turned behind her like waves of ink. Her eyes were white with glowing pupils of an even purer white that could easily be seen from a fair distance off. I caught swirling patterns that danced along her cheeks and sailed up into her hairline. They seemed bioluminescent and glowed like the white of her eyes. She wore a long flowing black dress, the tail of which whipped around behind her like a cape. When she and the 2 guards met at the bottom of the staircase, she set her hands before her like a prayer and bowed low to all of us. Her dress calmed as the engines behind her whirred down to silence. "Svol ki tresh," she said, her tone one of reverence. Her voice carried a strange accent to it, but it was a beautiful one that stressed the vowels in her speech. Charmed, I bowed low, and the 2 girls followed. Eric just gawked with his eyes wide and full of wonder. When Eileen rose again, she noticed the attention and a dark purple blush shaded her cheeks. City Master reached over to smack the back of Eric's head gently, his eyes screaming, "Behave." "Eileen Ajlal," he said as he bowed back.
We welcome you to Valcav Academy. I am Lars Shoemaker, the current headmaster. This is Douglas Aberforth, Gemma Corcoran, Ephraim Seidel, Adelaide Jones, and Hiro Saito. He gestured at each of the staff in turn, and then, with some hesitation, towards us. Before City Master could introduce him, Eric thrust a hand at Eileen and bounced again. Hi, I'm Eric. You're very pretty. I like the purple skin. Welcome. You're a princess, right? Can I call you Eileen? I'll address you as Your Highness if you like. I don't mind. This time it was Ephraim who smacked him on the back of the head, and he was a bit less gentle about it.
Calm down, Mr. Myers. Don't overwhelm the poor girl.
Right. Sorry. The exuberant youth apologized. Eileen covered her hand over her mouth while she giggled. It's all right, she said. Call me Eileen Aishlal. Eric thrust his hand out again, but she didn't seem to understand what he wanted, because she looked to the hand, to him, and back again. Eric realized his mistake a long, awkward moment later. Oh, it's a handshake. He spun on his heel and snatched my own hand to demonstrate. For once, I wasn't zapped for the trouble. See, it's a greeting. I'm sorry, I should have known. I rolled my eyes. Don't mind him, I told Eileen. He's just excited. I'm Nick Gadion. It's a pleasure. She smiled back, and for once, it was really refreshing to say my name to someone new and have it be an entirely normal occurrence. Cheer, Nick Gadion, she said in that same exotic accent. She then shifted her gaze to the two girls, who each smiled back in varying degrees of enthusiasm. Andy's expression was particularly heated. I could tell she sorely wanted to paint the girl. I'm Andy, she said with a grin. And I'm Kara, the quieter voice piped up at my side. Kara was still leaning on me, and this time it seemed more out of shyness than exhaustion. Kara Johnson. Cheer. Eileen smiled at both of them. At our confused faces, she explained. A greeting, like your hand? She peeled off a long black glove and offered her purple hand to me. It was laced in glowing patterns that danced around her fingers and curled around her wrist. Most were white, like the patterns on her face, but others glowed a pretty blend of blue, teal, and violet. I took her hand carefully. I couldn't feel the marks when we touched, and her skin had the same texture as a human's. Her skin was a little colder, though, nearly the temperature of the morning chill. Was she cold-blooded? Handshake, I explained, and shook hers twice. It's a way of making bonds. It's like an alliance. When you shake hands, it's a promise of peace. She took her hand back after I shook it, to stare at it thoughtfully. An interesting custom, she said softly. I'd like to learn more, if you're willing. Of course! Eric's grin was wide and eager. Class starts in a few hours. Let's catch up.